Welcome back, SPC listeners. We have another cool interview episode of the Student Pilot Cast today. We get to talk to Stu Stevenson, one of the owners of Thrust Flight in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and one of the hosts of the Pilot's Journey podcast, which is currently and unfortunately in hiatus right now, I think. I hope you enjoy this chat on episode 53, Zero Time to Airline.
Chandler Tower, Cherokee 4121 Tango's at Chandler Air Service. We have Zulu, and we'd like a south departure, please.
What does it take to be an angel? Where does the sun go when it sleeps? Is every star that shines?
In this discussion with Stu, we'll cover all sorts of cool topics from Stu's own training to how he and his business partner are running their flight and mechanic school today. We'll talk about their Zero Time to Airline program, the pilot shortage, and a lot of other great hangar flying. I think this one will be of particular interest to those of you out there who are thinking about becoming a pilot, especially if you're thinking about becoming a professional pilot. So let's get right into it. And I'm joined today by an old friend. Everybody will probably recognize him, Stu Stevenson. How are you doing, Stu?
Doing great. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it has. Stu is, among many other things, the organizer and one of the co-hosts of a Pilot's Journey podcast. We haven't heard from them in a while, but it was always one of my favorites. And is also a pilot, a CFI, a aviation school owner, and used to be an accountant, I think, right?
At one time I was, yes, correct.
So a jack of all trades. So excellent, Stu. Let us give us an update. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been doing lately.
Well, the last few years have been consumed with the pilot school. It started out as just a sidelight. We were selling the sport cruiser aircraft, and into 2017, we had some difficulties with the manufacturer on that, so we decided to drop that. So training from being a sidelight to support the sales became the primary focus. But it was still primarily recreational flyers at that time. And so it was a lot of individuals doing an individual rating and sometimes taking 2-3 years to do it, but other times an accelerated student. And those were a lot of fun because you get to see a lot happen very rapidly. Over the last couple of years with the pilot shortage, particularly pre-COVID and now, multiplied after COVID, it has been really crazy. So about half of our students are now career full-time students headed to the airlines. And so we still do a lot of the
where
recreational
in
flyers.
the past most of them were recreation oriented?
Correct. Almost all. Maybe a few here and there that would go on the airlines, but most were for recreational. And now it's about half and half. So it keeps us busy. It's more demand than we've ever seen before.
Yeah, I bet. We'll talk about that a little bit later for sure. So I always like to start with a little bit of the history, the beginnings. What got you interested in flying originally? Why did you become a pilot? How did you get in the industry?
I got interested as a child. The first taste was when I was in probably fourth grade. My father had a friend who had a license. He rented a Cessna, and the three of us went up. And I was sitting in the back seat. I was just, fell in love immediately. And really never did much with it, but built model airplanes and things like that. Went through high school, married my high school sweetheart, and her opinion was that I could learn to fly as soon as she was dead and the kids were grown. So that kind of put a stymie on things for a while. In 2003, I sold a business and was kind of looking for the next thing to do, and was a little bit bored, and she realized that. So she said, the kids aren't quite grown yet. She's not dead, but go ahead and do it. So I did the private pilot and then the instrument pilot almost immediately thereafter, and then kind of just enjoyed that for a while. Then coming in time for a BFR, we'll figure, well, I'll just do a commercial and add that to it. That'd be easier than doing a BFR. So I started working in commercial. That's when I met my current business partner, and we really hit it off. He's a great visionary, tremendous pilot and mechanic and everything else, but not a lot of business experience. Mm-hmm. And so I was able to give him that and get my free training for the commercial at that point. And we really hit it off. Now we're partners. And along the way, managed to pick up the CFI and the ATP. And now, unfortunately, I don't get to fly as much now. I'm primarily on the administrative side, so I only get about 75 to 100 hours a year. But I try to make the most of them. Not much training anymore either. I just do BFRs and endorsements now. The sign-offs
mostly for personal friends and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, know how that goes. So so here you are as an aviation business owner, and you're still stuck in the office.
Yeah, I know. It's not supposed to work like that.
Living the dream, but there you still are.
My business partner is a DPE, so at least he gets to fly a lot.
There you go. So it was about 2003 then that you learned to fly for the first time.
Right. Actually got my license in 2004.
At 2004. Okay. All right. And the interest started when you were a child and you just suppressed it for all that time, huh?
Yeah. I mean, money and time were always a factor, but it was really when I had a little of both that I was able to finally get it done.
Yeah. Did you have a flying or aviation mentor or role model when you did that, or did you just kind of seek somebody out, a school, and you just went and did it on your own?
I had a guy that I went to church with that was pursuing a career, and he was working on a CFI at the time, did not have it. But we flew together sometimes, and he practiced instructing on me a little bit. And then at that point, he got a job flying, I think it was medevac or something like that, or right seating in some sort of medical transport.
Okay.
And so he really didn't teach me. I ended up going to a ground school at a community college and used the classroom instructor for my instrument training. And then ultimately, Martin, my friend, let a CFI lapse because he was so busy flying the medical stuff. He does corporate today still, but
okay.
Still a good friend, but we just never actually got to officially be instructed.
Fly together, yeah. Okay. So you probably didn't realize you were going to get asked about this, so I'll tax your memory a little bit. But I'd love to know, and I'm sure the listeners would as well, what your training experience was like for your primary private pilot. Kind of set the stage for us. Did you do it part 61, or did you, were you flying a lot? Were you flying just occasionally? What were you flying? Did you stick with one instructor the whole time, et cetera? Just kind of let us know what that was like.
When I decided I was going to start, the first thing I did was find a ground class. And I had LASIK surgery done on a Saturday and started the ground class on a Tuesday night. And the first thing he said was go get a medical. So I go to my personal physician, who was also an AME.
Oh.
And that was back when we used paper forms. And we filled all the stuff out. And had
what are the chances your personal physician was already an AME? There's not a ton of them out there.
I didn't know that. Every time I was in his waiting room, I was always reading Flying Magazine.
Oh, there
he had
you go.
His magazine rack. So I already knew that part, and he was obviously very convenient. And he gave me some great advice. The first thing he said is, you don't want to apply having just had LASIK because they're going to hold you on the ground for 6 months till it's stable and defer your medical. You'll have to have all these tests. It'll be expensive. And he just tore up the paper thing and said, we lost that one. Mm. And he said the second piece of advice is, and for continuing that thought, he said, wait 3 or 4 months, get a letter from your ophthalmologist that everything is stable, and you can reapply for medical, everything will be fine. Then second thing he says, don't use your personal physician. I know all of your medical history.
Oh, interesting.
You probably want someone who doesn't know you very well. I didn't have anything wrong, but he just was, some wisdom there he passed along. And he gave me the name of another AME to go see when I was ready.
Interesting. I've never thought of that before.
So I actually finished the ground school and took the written before I started any flight training, which is not how I'd recommend someone do it. It's just that way it worked out because of the LASIK.
Right.
I started flight training with that same instructor that did the ground school. And at the beginning, it was great. I hit the plateau, which most people find somewhere along training, which was really right pre-solo. I just couldn't get consistent on my landings. And he was a great instructor, so we'd go and work on other things for a while. He just had me do one phase of the landing and focus on that, and then the next phase. And I know it's a term you're familiar with, but focus on the end of the runway. And, hold it off, hold it off, hold it off.
Don't land, don't land, don't land. Hold it off, hold it off, hold it off. Yeah.
You've been there. So I eventually got through that. And that was probably the most difficult part, was that pre-solo. And knowing that if I get 3 good consecutive landings on 3 consecutive lessons, which is his criteria, that I was going to be soloing. And that scared me to death.
Yeah.
I just didn't think I was ready. And in fact, I tried to talk him out of it when he actually started to get out of the plane. He said, let's do one more round, one more lap. And he said, no, you're ready, go.
What were you flying?
But getting through that was a 172.
A 172, okay.
I was at a flying club, and they had 2 172s, a Warrior, an Archer, I think a Cherokee 6. And so I switched back and forth between the 2 172s. And occasionally we do the Archer if the Cessnas were gone, but tried to keep it to one type, and that was a good thing.
Yep.
A little confusing switching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, different numbers, different feel, yeah.
The numbers are actually pretty close, but it definitely a different feel, and different sight picture and all of that.
Different place for the flaps, different muscle memory. Yep.
Oh, yes.
Yep.
Even the throttle's a different place.
That's true. That's true, yeah.
So I completed the private in about 4 months. I was flying two times most weeks.
That's pretty fast.
I get 3 in.
That's way above average.
I was hitting it hard.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think I would counsel myself against doing if I were to approach it again is I read everything I could find on flying. And today it would be YouTube. That wasn't as big then. But I just couldn't get enough, and consuming everything, and then asking questions about everything I'd read, which a lot of it was contradictory.
Oh, yes.
And my instructor kept saying, quit reading that stuff. You're messing your mind up. And I was, but I'm kind of glad I did it.
It's like having some sort of physical ailment and deciding you're going to look it up on WebMD. And then you pretty much convince yourself that you're going to die. Yeah.
That's right. Doctors love when you do that.
CFIs love it when you learn how to land on articles and YouTube, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, you can. That's all you need is YouTube and a flight simulator, maybe, if you want to go with.
Right. In fact, that's probably what happened with that non-pilot in Florida recently who just landed that Cessna Caravan. I think it was. Did you hear about that?
Yeah. It was just because
it was YouTube.
Flight simulator.
Yeah, flight simulator. Yeah. I actually, I don't want to get into the controversy, but I have my doubts that he had never landed before. But we'll talk about that another time when we're hangar flying. How about that?
I suspect he had a lot of right seat time.
A lot of right seat time with his
maybe
buddy.
Not on the controls, but definitely watching everything.
Yeah. Anyway, I got us sidetracked. Go ahead.
Well, following private, I went right into instrument and took about 4 months for that as well. And I was lucky. My instructor insisted we get some actual, so I probably had about 4 or 5 hours of actual when I got my certificate, which proved well. My first real instrument flight, I flew from Addison to San Antonio, and was coming back, and I tried 2 different approaches into Addison and just could not get a visual on the runway environment. So they said it was a little clearer in McKinney, which is about 20 miles north. So I went up there and landed the plane, and it was a taxi at that time. There wasn't Uber. Back to Addison to pick up my car, and just left the plane there. Luckily, the school I had rented from had a location in both spots, and I told them, I'll be happy to ferry it over as soon as the weather clears. But they were fine with that. They didn't really care where it was left.
You said this was during your instrument training, right?
This was immediately after, probably a month after I got my instrument ticket.
Oh, right after your instrument.
So it was my first real hard IFR.
Got it. Okay.
And probably the hardest IFR I've been in. Actually, I've never had a real missed more than once. Wow. So usually I'm not going to fly if it's really low.
Sure.
And so in this case, it just came down. It was lower than predicted.
How long after your primary training was this? After you got your private?
That was probably 5 or 6 months after I got my private.
Okay, so you did it right
away.
Just
completed my instrument.
All right.
Right. Yeah.
Same instructor?
And then I didn't. Same instructor.
Okay.
I started with the same instructor on commercial a year or 2 later when I started that.
Okay.
But I had found that he and I were pretty good friends at this point, and a little socializing as well. And I found I didn't fly as well with him as I did with Patrick, my business partner.
Little too familiar.
A part of it was the familiarity.
Yeah.
It was just 2 buddies flying. I wasn't really learning, so to speak. It was my fault. It wasn't his teaching technique.
Sure.
So that's why I let Patrick finish me up on commercial.
That's why a lot of parents don't teach their kids, right?
I tried teaching my son to drive. That did not work well at all.
Little
my
too familiar,
was great, though. So
yeah. Depends on the personality.
It depends on the personality.
Yep.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. And did you use the 172 for your IFR training as well? Your instrument rating?
I did mostly on that. It wasn't as big a deal during the personal flying. I was using the Archers more than I was the 172s. So they were easier to schedule.
Oh, okay.
So I was pretty familiar with both at that point, but the instrumentation was better in the Cessna, so I tried to stick with those.
Okay.
It wasn't a lot back then, but it was better.
Yeah. All right. So you've already talked about kind of your progression and how you went into commercial for a biennial flight review instead of doing just the BFR.
Right.
Or I guess we call them just reviews now, not biennial flight reviews.
True.
It's hard to get out of the habit. Tell us a little bit about the rest of your progression in your aviation career after that. You got your commercial, but you weren't really thinking at that point that you would do anything with it, that you would actually fly commercially. Is that right?
Well, I never thought I'd fly commercially. I had thought about becoming an instructor at some point, but that was, after I retired, that
Sure.
might be something good as a sidelight. It was in the commercial check ride that the examiner is the one that really convinced me, go ahead and do it now. There's no reason to wait. You can still do it part-time, but
Okay.
you'll learn more doing that than you'll ever do by just, flying.
So that sort of,
and he was right.
that catapulted you into the CFI training when you did the
It
commercial.
did. It wasn't immediate.
Okay.
I planned I would probably do it over the next couple of years, probably wait 2 years till it was time for another flight review. And about a year afterwards, after my commercial, Patrick and I were starting to hit it off and decided we were going to do some real partnership efforts on business. And at that point, he said, you really need to become an instructor, because at that time he was the only instructor and the mechanic and the salesman, and he needed some help. And so that's why I went ahead and did it at that time. I was at Oshkosh and talked to Rod Machado. It was asking him, should I do it accelerated? Should I take my time? What was the best? And he recommended a flight school in particular he was familiar with. It was in Minnesota that he said would be a great value. And I also wanted something away. If it's accelerated, I wanted something away from home so I wasn't distracted.
Sure.
And that turned out to be a great choice. And then, so I got the instructor rating, and really, the very next day when I was returning to Dallas, Patrick and I were full time.
Okay.
In the aircraft sales and training business.
Okay. This was a while after you had sold your business, right? So you weren't really working full-time elsewhere, right?
2011 is when it actually completed, yeah.
2011. Okay.
I started in 2010 working with them, and in 2011 became CFI and we became full partners.
Okay. All right. Well, this is interesting. I'm going to dive into something I didn't realize I was going to. You did an accelerated CFI. So let's talk about that. How long did it take? And I'm not going to ask you about costs because they're irrelevant back in 2010, 2011 by today's standards. But
it was cheap back then compared to what it costs
yeah,
today.
Totally. But tell me about that accelerated course. Like, how long did it take? What was it like? What was the experience like? How much flying? I haven't really been able to dive into any type of accelerated rating with anybody before, so this is pretty interesting. I'd love to hear about that.
It was a great course. It was very small at school. There was I think 4 airplanes and probably 6 or 7 instructors. And one instructor, the chief instructor, was the one that was really focused on our training. There were two of us in the class. And so it was very personal. We would taught each other back and forth, got a great rapport with the other student. And then it was very heavily classroom. I thought I was well prepared. I read everything I was supposed to read before I got there, and realized once I actually started doing it, I didn't know nearly enough. So it was very intense, and I spent 8 or 9 hours in either training or one-on-one kind of training with the instructor or teaching the other student during the day, and then would go spend another 4 or 5 hours in the evening just going through flashcards and reading and rebuilding landing lesson plans, and then throwing those away and redoing them again.
How many students were in the program at that time that you were going through with?
Just 2 of us.
Just 2 of you. Okay.
Just 2 of us. I had one partner, and that was it.
And it was literally all day. I mean, every waking hour you were working on this. besides eating?
I was. I never turned a TV on. Talked to my wife for probably 20 minutes a night, and that was it. Everything else was all flying or sleep.
Wow.
Or it wasn't flying, but training or sleep. There really isn't that much flying to do. It's mostly groundwork.
Is there a written for the CFI? I actually don't know. Is there a written for the CFI? A written test?
There's actually two.
Two written tests?
There's a written test for the CFI, and then also the fundamentals of instruction.
Oh, right, because you have to do both. Okay. And so had you completed those before you started, or did you do that as part of the accelerated course?
I didn't. I took them before I went.
Okay.
Just, again, trying to be as prepared as I could, even though I really wasn't as prepared as I should have been.
Sure.
My partner was probably better prepared on the study, but had not done the writtens yet.
Okay, interesting.
And so I got a little extra one-on-one instruction while he was doing his writtens there.
Gotcha.
But that helps a lot to have done. I actually was a glutton for punishment. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do a sports CFI or a full CFI several months before I went. So on the same day, this was back when you do all the tests written. So I did the sports CFI, the CFI, and the advanced ground instructor all the same day. Just bang, bang, bang. They're essentially the same test. So I knocked all of those out together. Then the fundamentals of instruction I did like a week later.
Okay. Tell me again, you may have mentioned this, but I didn't catch it. How long was the accelerated course? Was it 2 weeks?
It was supposed to be 2 weeks for CFIA, the airplane instructor, and then another 1 to 2 weeks for instrument instructor.
Okay.
We had some weather issues. It snowed on us in August in
what?
It was Albert Lee, Minnesota. I was floored by that.
That's stunning.
It was actually early for them as well. So we had some weather issues. We had major problem finding DPEs. And this was back when the FAA really wanted to give initial instructor check rides.
Oh, right.
So they kind of let us on for several days and finally designated to a DPE. But then the DPE they designated couldn't do it. So we had to find someone. That took about a week to get the check rides lined up. And so I never really finished the instrument at that point. We ran out of time, and I had really only planned for 3 weeks. And it was pushing into the fourth week before we finally got it done because of the delays.
Oh, okay. So you went home without
I regret that.
Without the CFI and did it later.
Actually, I never.
Oh, you never did it?
I've never done it. I've taken the written test 4 times, and every time it's expired.
Oh man!
Well,
you got that written down.
Things came up and just never finished it. Keeping instrument proficiency in Texas is hard, kind of like it is in Arizona, I suspect.
Sure.
It's all under the hood. That's not as realistic. Well, I've taken the instrument instructor written 4 different times. They've expired each time. That says how long. If they figure they're 2 years, that's 8 years that I've been working on this in some form, including as recently as last year. But my goal is to go ahead in the next couple of years to finish that up. I'm only going to take it written one more time. So I'm going to get it done after this next one.
I might suggest you take it once you start the training portion of it.
That is the goal this time. I've got a long history of doing the writtens early, so I probably should not keep doing that.
Well, I mean,
when I did the ATP, it was right after they changed the rules, where you had to have the ATP CTP. So I took my written test 2 weeks before the rule expired, where you didn't have to have that. And it was almost exactly 2 years from that I took the check ride.
Oh, man.
So I probably wouldn't have an ATP because at that point it just doesn't make sense for me to do the ATP CTP course, being that I'm not going to fly airliners.
Right. We'll get to that in a second, but I do have a question about the ATP. So you had a good experience overall with that accelerated course and would recommend it?
I would, particularly the instructor course. There's so much information that is, basically all of your private, all of your commercial, and a good chunk of your instrument, plus instructing. You then add to that all from the right seat. So there's a lot to absorb. And for most people, not everyone, but most people, I think, on something like that, if you're cramming, which is what you have to do for that much information, cramming works better in a condensed period of time.
Yep. Okay. All right. So on to the ATP. What drove you to get your ATP?
I could.
It was
that was
there.
the main thing. Yeah, I saw the opportunity slipping away because of the change in the rules.
I see.
And so I figured, well, if I'm going to do it, I better do it now. So I did it. At the time that I took the written, I had just started my commercial multi-training. The school bought a Cessna 310 with the intention that my business partner would get his ATP, and I'd get my commercial multi and probably MEI, which I didn't do that one either. So that was the reason we bought the plane. And then he did his ATP, and then figure before we sell that plane, before my test runs out, let's go ahead and do it.
I see.
And so I was able to knock that out.
Okay. And when was that?
Actually is a fairly easy rating as long as you can stay within the 50 feet requirement.
Okay.
Because it's essentially the commercial multi-check ride, but with slightly higher tolerances.
Well, if you want to stay within 50 feet, I would recommend not doing it in the afternoon on a hot summer day anywhere like Texas or Arizona.
Well, the examiners know about that, though. So it's 50 feet within what the air is doing, not necessarily what the altimeter says.
Right. Okay, cool. So what year was that when you got the ATP?
I think it was 2016, but I don't even remember now. It has been a while, maybe 2017.
Yeah, it was about the time
it all
that
runs together.
The airlines before the pandemic were really stressing out about finding pilots, right? And
right, I'm 61 years old, and I was still getting letters. In fact, I got one this year from airlines that see in the FAA database that I've got an ATP, and they're still recruiting me. If they can get 3 or 4 years, it's worth it to them.
And the FAA database, they know your age, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I've only talked to the recruiters that have come to the school. I haven't really responded to any of those postcards or letters I get.
It's pretty amazing.
But the ones at the school say, "Oh yeah, we'll take you if you want to fly. We'll take you." If you've got an ATP and pulse, you're hired.
Yeah,
if you've got enough turbine time, they'll waive the pulse.
Can you fog this mirror?
They're crazy. They'll take anybody.
Right.
Yes.
That's amazing. I mean, we'll talk about that a little bit too later, but I want to ask you a couple of fun questions. So you've probably flown a bunch of different types, a bunch of different types of airplanes. I would love to know what your favorite airplane to fly is.
Favorite is a tough word to
I know,
work out,
because favorite for what, right? Yeah, I know. And it's okay if you want to answer more and say, well, for low and slow, I like this. For traveling, I like this. Go ahead.
Probably one of the planes I've had the most fun in is an air coupe.
Oh, okay.
I had a chance to fly a couple of those. I became the school air coupe champion for a while, where anyone that needed air coupe training, which there's not a lot of those, I got to teach.
Did you guys have one?
No. Well, we did briefly. We took one on trade.
Oh, okay.
That's where I first got introduced to the air coupe. But since I had at that time a whopping 2 or 3 hours in them, as people called and said,
you were the
anyone
expert
that could teach me in an air coupe,
yeah.
I was the guy. So those are a lot of fun. Dispatch reliability was a problem.
Oh, I bet.
I probably at least 1 out of 3, maybe 1 out of 2 times we tried to head out, something canceled the flight before we ever got in the air.
It was mechanical, right?
Fragile plane.
Now,
it was mechanical.
Did you love it because you didn't have to use your feet, or no? I'm just kidding.
No, that actually drove me nuts. I was still pushing the floorboards. There was nothing down there, but I was pushing the floor trying to get some rudder in there. But, now, what made it fun was the open canopy and the fact that you smell the grass. They talk about flying a Cub.
Yep.
And when I was flying a Cub, I was trying to learn my tail wheel, so I wasn't focused on the grass. I was focused on keeping the nose pointed the right way.
Did you have the doors off or on with the Cub?
They were on,
okay.
But the little window was open.
Sure.
Yeah, the air coupe is just, everything about it is so simple and straightforward and no nonsense. Wooden seats, wooden floorboards, wooden dashboard, and basically a single control device. But it was just always fun.
That sounds cool. All right. What's your least favorite airplane? Go ahead. You were going to say something else?
Well, I was just thinking for different types of flying.
Sure, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I like, there's very few planes I haven't really liked. I had an Aero for a while. A great businessman. I bought an Aero like a month before they changed the rules that said you don't have to have complex for commercial and CFI.
Right.
And so I never did put that one on the line. I just fixed it up and flipped it. But I love that plane. That was great. I've got a Cirrus now. My wife's requirements to fly is that it have air conditioning and a parachute. So it kind of narrowed the field down a little bit.
Sure.
And so that's why we have a Cirrus now.
Yeah.
And that one's a great traveling machine. It's not a sporty machine.
Yeah.
So it's like, I think Austin, I can't remember his last name, the guy that wrote X-Plane. He had a Cirrus and then bought a Columbia. And he made a nice analogy that the Cirrus is like the Lexus and the Columbia is like the Corvette.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
The Corvette is tight and very sporty, but you're also cramped. The Lexus, you're spread out, you're comfortable, smooth, everything is just very luxurious.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the comparison I see as well.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, they're selling a bunch of those things right now, aren't they? Those Cirrus airplanes.
The new ones.
It's amazing. Yeah, they're just selling them like I've never seen. It's amazing. All right, cool. And so you don't have any that you didn't really enjoy, huh? You're an equal opportunity
flyer. The least favorite was either the RV-12 or the Remos, and that was because they were they were a totally different feel from the Sport Cruiser, which is the other light sport that I'm most familiar with.
Okay.
They are good planes, but they felt clunky compared to what I was used to. Again, kind of that Corvette versus the Lexus comparison.
Yeah. So do you prefer a true stick, a stick like the Cirrus, or a yoke? It
doesn't make any difference. Within 5 minutes, you forget what the differences are. I mean, they all feel natural.
Gotcha. All right, good. So you mentioned how the flight school got started. It was sort of a business venture between you and your friend as you guys started flying together. Tell us a little bit about the evolution of the school. Once it got started and how it's evolved and so on. And I'm going to dive into a little bit about your philosophies of training there and what you've seen in the industry and so on. But let's just start with how did it evolve and, what are the big things that you've learned?
It started as, again, aircraft sales was the primary focus, and then a little maintenance to support the people that bought planes, a little training to support the people that bought planes, and then a few outside maintenance or outside training people along the way. But again, the real focus was selling airplanes. And the Sport Cruiser was a plane we distributed, and I absolutely love the plane. It's still one of my favorite of any kind of plane. But it was a Czech company that went through some hard times. They were very successful. We sold about 600 of those in the U.S. over the span from 2006 to 2017, and it did very well. But the factory became a little more difficult to work with, and there were some tensions there between some people that are no longer at the factory. And so we decided in beginning in 2017 that we weren't going to sell it anymore. We couldn't come to an agreement to renew our agreement. So at that point, it was, now what do we do? Well, we've already got students. We already got maintenance. Let's just focus on those. And it was very easy at that time. It was kind of an uptick in 2017 to people were interested in flying. Not so much for the airlines, although there was some of that. It was a lot of people just recreationally flying because the economy was good and then people had the time and the money to do it.
Yep.
And that was probably the most fun from a training point for me because I was still teaching, and not so totally focused on the business side that I could still stay in the cockpit and get to know students and see them progress. But as things heated up, 2018, 2019, the airline demand got stronger and stronger. We added a career path program, the Zero Time to Airline program.
Okay.
And that became a pretty major thing. We got the 141 certification. I'm kind of the compliance officer for the company, so I did that. We did an aerial tour, so I got the 91 147 certification for that. Our maintenance, we needed to become Part 145 repair station in that process, and so I got all those certificates. And we're in the process of becoming a 147 maintenance school now. So
no wonder you're always in the office, Stu.
I spent a lot of time reading regs, let's put it that way. One of the things we discovered is that as we grew, we were having a hard time finding instructors. And so we decided, well, we need to start building our own. So we created a CFI Academy that was an intense 2-week, actually 10 to 14 day, depends how you structured the individual class and what the students' desires were. But 10 to 14 days, and they would have their CFI certificate. It was very intense ground school. We had a no-fly option. So some people would come in, take the ground school, and go back and work with their local CFI to finish and take the check ride at home. And that's still very popular. So we found that we made some really good instructors.
You essentially put into effect a program similar to the one you went and did.
That was a lot of the model.
Okay.
That was the vision, is I wanted to replicate that, but on a larger scale and a little quicker, so that we didn't have some of the delays that a small school had where I did it.
Right.
We recruited Bob Choate, who's a nationally recognized, distinguished instructor, to head the academy up, and he did a fantastic job. And so he personally oversaw the graduation of probably about 500 students to that program.
Wow.
And he has since retired. He still consults with us, but he's retired. But we've kept that same format going, and we do the 10 to 14 day CFI. We do 7 to 9 day double I, and it's been very successful. And we got the cream of the crop become our instructors. We were having trouble getting mechanics, so that's the impetus for us now doing the same thing with a 147 mechanic school. We just need to build our own since we can't find them on the open market.
It worked for the pilots, so why not, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's actually more demand in that area than there is for pilots right now, believe it or not.
Interesting.
So that was another reason we did it. There's some of the community colleges in the region are interested in partnering with us on that for degree programs, where they would provide the core courses and we'd provide the topic training.
The hands-on. Yeah, okay.
Right.
Oh, cool. All right. And so that's kind of where you're headed in the future. I think last time we were talking, you talked about possibly even expanding to new locations, right?
We opened our second location in October. It's only about an hour away from our primary location. We wanted something that's close to home to basically learn how to do it wrong, so that the next location we can do better. Okay. And we've learned some things along the process, and we're talking now with another regional. It's probably about 2.5, 3 hours away, about possibly opening a location there. And eventually we'll expand to Florida and Arizona, which are the two main things. Texas, Florida, and Arizona are the three best climates in the country, both business and weather, right, to conduct training. So that we'll be in all three places.
Oh, interesting. So expansion is on the horizon. So
it is. We're trying to do one location a year.
Oh, that's fast. All right. A lot of learning. All right. So what we haven't talked about yet is what's the name of your flight school?
Thrust Flight.
That's a new rebranding, is it not?
Thrust.
Yeah.
We were U.S. sport aircraft, but since we no longer selling aircraft, we didn't think that was an appropriate name, so we rebranded to Thrust Flight.
Okay. All right. Tell us a little bit about and you've touched on it a little bit, but I'd love to understand your philosophy and mission around the flight training, since that's what this podcast focuses on.
It's split. We have two distinct flavors, if you will. We have the career training for the zero time to airline people headed to either corporate or airline aviation. And those folks, we really try to keep it as consistent with the program they're going to have there. They wear uniforms. They're not epaulets. They're just Nike sport shirts. But
like a polo or something,
all of
right?
Our instructors wear all of our instructors wear a black polo, Nike polo, and then all of the ZTA students, we call them zero time to airline students, wear red ones. And then they get little.
Thank you, by the way, for not perpetuating the epaulet thing.
Oh, we tried anything to avoid that. Ties and epaulets we really don't want to do.
Sorry,
mainly we don't want to wear them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
For the career training, we try to make it crew-oriented We try to. It's a full-time program. They don't have time for another school or for work, so they're on campus usually about 8-9 hours a day, and 6-7 days a week. And we have housing for some of the out-of-town folks that they'll go home and study at night for several hours. So it's a very intense program. There is a dropout rate because not everyone can do that pace, and so we have what we call a paced program. It's still a career program, but then shifted to be a little slower paced, where they could do that over a longer period of time and not have so many fire hoses to drink from there.
How long? So the immersive program, what do you call that one? The one
Zero Time to Airline.
Zero Time to Airline.
That's all in full time. Get it done fast.
That's the one where you're on campus. You're doing it all the time. What is the trajectory for that? How long does it take for them to get all their ratings?
The goal is to complete in 9 months. The average is really somewhere in that 10th to maybe 11th month, depending on weather. So definitely less than a year, but we try to keep them as short a time as possible so they can start earning their hours towards the ATP. Most of them will hire as instructors for our own school. Though if we can't take someone, we don't have enough slots. We have agreements with several other schools that are having difficulty finding instructors, so we'll help place them in one of those schools to get their hours.
So 9 to 11 months. Sorry to interrupt, but the 9 to 11 months, that includes CFI and CFII. Is that right?
Correct. Right.
What about
MEI is optional.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask. Okay.
It does include the multi-commercial rating, and most people get 25 hours of multi-time. Some will say, let's use part of that 25 hours and get the MEI as well. But that's kind of an optional thing that some choose, some don't.
Okay. All right. So I interrupted you. Keep going.
Once they complete the CFI and II, at that point they're finished with the program officially. And so they'll start instructing. Typically, they'll instruct with us. And we can get them about 100 hours a month typically. And they'll do that for anywhere from 9 to 18 months, kind of depending on how hard they want to work and how many hours they get. And
before they get their 1,500
really
and get hired somewhere, right?
Right.
Okay.
Although we do have a partnership program, Envoy, the American Airlines wholly owned subsidiary, they've got a cadet program, where they will actually hire the student when they complete commercial before they even have their CFI.
Okay. And
they become an Envoy employee. We lease them back from Envoy to instruct for us. But while they're instructing, they are an Envoy employee. They have a seniority number. It's not their final pilot seniority number. It's an employee seniority number.
Okay.
So it's not quite like coming in an extra year early, but it's close. But they still get full travel benefits, full health and all that kind of stuff.
Wow.
So it really works out nice. The travel benefits alone are worth it for most people.
I can't get over
Envoy because they now have a loyal employee that's ready to go as soon as they get their hours.
Sure. Yeah. I can't get over the fact that you said we'll lease them back, and we're talking about people, not airplanes.
That is true. For all intents and purposes, they're our employees, but legally they're Envoy's employees. So Envoy pays their health insurance. We don't have to pay that, and things like that. Works out really well for us as well.
Nice. All right. That's very interesting. I hadn't heard of that before.
A couple of the schools are doing things like that, trying to get people on board early. Most of the schools we work with have some sort of cadet program, but Envoy is the only one that really actually hires them and pays them directly at that point.
Cool. All right. What would you say is the percentage of folks in that program that are, I know it says, zero time to airline, but how many of those folks do you think choose a non-airline, route? Maybe they go, corporate flying or, some other type of professional flying.
Most choose airline just because that's the most vocal need. They're the largest.
Okay.
There are some that go corporate. We encourage them if they think they might want to do airline to start there. It's easier to go to airline without having had corporate background, where it's not as hard to go from airline to corporate.
Sure.
But those that don't want to teach, we've got an arrangement with Ameriflight and then I think one other freight carrier that does either Part 135 or Part 91 cargo flying. And a few of the students that don't really find teaching is their thing will opt to go there.
Yeah.
It's a little slower than teaching as far as getting your hours, but it's another option.
But they don't have to teach, and it's not something they want to do.
They don't have to teach.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if it's not something they want to do, it's probably better for the students that they go to do that instead.
And for them. For everybody's mental health, it's better.
Right.
Yeah. Good deal. So for the Av Geeks that I have in my listenership, what equipment are you guys using for your training?
We have a mix. We've got about 6 sport cruisers. We've got, I don't know how many now, 8 or 9 Cessnas. We ordered 12 Archers that actually start delivering in next month, which will be June. We'll have 12 of those this year. Then we haven't finalized the order, but probably order another 12 next year. And we get them all with air conditioning because we're in Texas.
Yeah.
So that's kind of nice. But they're all G1000.
What a nice
The
perk.
only planes we have, all of our aircraft are glass cockpit.
Okay.
And most of them have air conditioning. The sport cruisers don't, unfortunately. They just can't take the weight.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. And what about for your multi?
We're using Seminoles for the multi.
Okay. Air conditioning? I'm just kidding. I don't know.
On those, no, we don't have air conditioning. Those are the other two classes, the sport cruisers and the Seminoles, so we can't get air conditioning. The new Seminoles we can, but they're about $1 million a piece, so we haven't bought a new one yet.
Yeah, I hear you. And is that across both of your locations as well as your future locations that you're planning on? Or is that just the one location?
Right. They're at all the locations, and we will eventually be probably an all Piper fleet.
Okay.
Or at least Piper and sport cruiser. We try to cycle the planes out after 5 years, and so the older Cessnas are starting to get there, and we've got by the time the newer ones get to 5 years, we'll probably have Pipers to replace them.
Okay. And are they delivering fast enough for you?
No. Because of the supply chain problems, we originally hoped to start getting them in March, and they're about 3 months behind there. At one time, we thought it might get 6 or 7 on the first sweep, but they weren't able to get enough, or at least not to allocate to our purchase order, that they could get them all out to us at once there. We originally planned to have 7 delivered in the first swipe and then 5 in the second. But they'll probably just trickle out over the next 6 months.
So whatever you can get, you could start using, right?
Oh, yeah. We've already got people booked on them, and we're not even sure the exact date we're getting them. But
man. So let's compare and contrast now that we're talking about all your glass cockpits and everything like that. Compare and contrast a student who would be in your school today versus the instruction that you received. Whether it's equipment, avionics, philosophy, approach, anything. Just kind of, what are some of the differences that you notice?
Well, when I was in my training, it was at a flying club, so it was all, by definition, recreational. Mm-hmm. And so economy was the most important thing. Economy and safety, and that's pretty much all that anyone cared about. At the flight school, these are people, at least half are people that are going to airlines, and they want to fly something that's going to be as close as possible to what they're eventually going to be flying. And so it's got to be glass cockpit. The airlines want that kind of experience as well. The recreational flyers that we have still want the nice toys and the fancy stuff. So
and the air conditioning.
They benefit from it as well. And the air conditioning.
I bet you didn't have air conditioning, right?
Can afford that.
When you flew, when you trained?
I did not have air conditioning, no.
I've never had air conditioning.
It was, open both windows and take a dive if you want to get cool.
Yeah. All right, sorry, go ahead.
So the people can tend to be able to afford, or our students can afford, it costs more to operate glass planes than brand new planes and air conditioning and all that. But so far, the price hasn't really been a strong factor. We try to keep the pricing down. The fuel is not making that easy these days. But it still doesn't seem to slow down. We still can't get enough planes to get everybody in the air that wants to get up right now. So, and I think all schools are kind of facing that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a good problem to have, but it sure would be nice if it were more affordable. Speaking of that, what percentage would you say, I'm sure you offer financing and so on for especially your ab initio students. What percentage do you take advantage of something like that, would you say?
For the career program, I'd say 90% are taking some sort of financial aid.
Okay.
That may be a 429 plan that they've already had set aside, or it could be a private loan. We're one of about less than half a dozen non-university schools that have Sallie Mae financing available. And so I'd say the vast majority take advantage of that.
Okay. All right. Tell me how you guys think about safety. What role do you think initial flight training has in the safety in the industry? How do we improve safety at that initial flight training level, especially for your career-oriented pilots? You mentioned earlier that you focus on crew resource management. What in general do you think the role is, and what are you guys doing to kind of improve overall safety?
It's a huge concern and a huge liability. With insurance like it is today, you can't afford to have any accidents on your record. So you've got to do everything you can to prevent it, not only from a safety standpoint, but for an economical viability standpoint. So we pay a lot of attention to that. We are probably slow to solo somebody. We'll let them accumulate more experience, more hours that they really are ready to solo before we actually set them loose. But the way we've designed our curriculum, they get a little further into it and build up some experience. We put them through a few trial scenarios and lessons that are oriented towards stressing to see how do they handle a stress situation a little earlier in the syllabus than at least when I got it in training.
Okay.
That's part of it. We use a safety management system. We encourage, no fault reporting at all levels. And we have a pretty good stream of reports. Maybe just that there's a ladder that could lean over that could fall onto a plane, or there's a bump in the tarmac where I'm afraid I'm going to have a prop strike going over, things like that. To where we've had one recently that reported that there was they called it near miss. It was probably 1,000 feet, but that's still pretty close.
Yeah.
In the practice area, and addressing that. And we have a safety committee that meets officially once a month, usually a little more frequently informally, that goes over those. We do instructor presentations every 2 weeks on safety topics as part of our normal instructor briefing. We have a safety stand down at least once a year.
Okay. A few questions that came out of that. What's the makeup of your safety committee?
It's led by one of our line instructors.
Okay.
Management sits in, but is not taking the primary role because, again, it's non-punitive. It's designed to be anonymous, where only the chairman, the line instructor, knows the names of the people submitting, or they can submit anonymously, and even she doesn't know. So that it's designed that we can get the information and act on it without someone having fear that they're going to get in trouble. And that's a cornerstone of it.
Cool. That sounds pretty awesome, actually. Most of your reporters, the people reporting in that system, are they students or instructors? Or is it a mix?
Probably more instructors. It's definitely a mix, but more instructors of any single category. But we have maintenance technicians reporting. We have ramp workers reporting. Students. It's pretty much anybody in the company is encouraged. We keep QR codes all over the place so they can easily get to the forum to report things.
Cool. And then one other thing you said piqued my interest a little bit. You said that in the curriculum, you've designed stressors in there to kind of help evaluate as well as condition students for stressors. Can you give a couple of examples of those?
The instructors have some flexibility on that. But part of it is where the instructor might actually lean a toe on a rudder during stall practice, things like that. And again, how does a student recover from that? They should know at that point how to recover from a stall. They've learned about spins and how to recognize an incipient spin and react to it. And so the instructor's putting a little thing like that into it.
I see.
A lot of things like distracting, so that they're getting close to airspace. They'll fail instruments. Little surreptitiously, like dimming the console when the student's distracted looking out the window or something like that. So that they have little tricks and ploys they do that are just designed to really harass the student. But ultimately, the intention is to Well, the intention is to put some stress in there and then get the student to recover on their own.
Right. I imagine they talk about this with each other, the instructors, and giggle a little bit as they come up with new ideas, right?
They do, and we have some of the students that GoPro everything, and so the instructors will generally try to get a copy of the recordings of those for the instructor meetings, and occasionally some of the footage makes it on a YouTube channel. So,
oh, that's awesome. Speaking of which, why don't you mention the YouTube channel? Is it Thrust Flight?
Just YouTube, just /Thrust Flight. Seems to be pretty popular. We try to get something up every week. They're also active in TikTok, but those are a little more humorous, very short versus instructional or a day in the life kind of thing.
I'm just impressed somebody your age, Stu, knows what TikTok is. Because I just learned it from you.
I'm not an avid TikTok user, but I actually have an account. I never posted anything, but I do have an account. So.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, because I know nothing about it either. All right. Tell me your thoughts. This can be from a professional standpoint or your own personal thoughts or whatever, but your thoughts on the current pilot shortage. I know you're doing your part by training as many as you can. But do you're in the industry. Do you think that this is a semi-long-term problem? Do you have any ideas on how the industry could approach fixing the pilot shortage? Just what are your thoughts in general?
I think it is long-term, probably at least another 10, probably more years. That's based primarily on Boeing studies where they think they need, I don't know what it was, 600,000 pilots in the next 25 years. And more than that on mechanics, like 650,000 mechanics.
Wow.
And if every school in the country was producing full capacity, or the world for that matter, we won't make it. They just can't produce that many pilots with the resources that are currently devoted. So there'll have to be more schools and more methods to do it. I think financing is probably the biggest hurdle to people entering the industry.
The initial financing, right? Initial training, yeah.
For all of your ratings, you're probably looking at $100,000 on the high end, $75,000 to $100,000, and you still got to live during that time.
Yep.
So that it gets very expensive. It's not like a 4-year degree, but it's not that far from it either.
Yep.
So that's the biggest.
It's more immediately applicable in some ways, though, than a 4-year degree.
It is. We actually encourage our students to come directly out of high school.
Okay.
Get that clock ticking.
Yep. Get
those ratings. Build those hours. Get your seniority number as quickly as possible. We did a study, I think year before last, that. And this was based on 2019, so it was pre-COVID, and it's even more so now. But someone entering the airline 6 months earlier and having a 6-month higher seniority number could be up to a $2 million difference by the time they retire.
Wow.
Just in the 401k size and the fact they'll have a better life. Again, working as an airline pilot's not that glorious and fun for the first few years.
Yep.
You're on reserve. You're flying the worst times. Every holiday you miss.
The worst places.
Birthday you seem to miss. Yep. And you're based in some place that's horrible that you have to commute to. So that's a day on either side of your work that you have to lose.
Yep.
So it's not that glamorous. But the good news is when you make first officer at a major, it starts to get a little better just because you're going to better places.
Yep.
When you make captain on a major, you start. That's your last low point on the totem pole.
Yep.
So you start climbing and you'll never go down again.
Yeah.
And by the time a captain retires, they're making well over $500,000 a year, working 11 days a month, flying what they want to do and where they want to go.
Yeah.
So it can be a really nice career. You just have to be willing to accept those rough times for a year or so as you start a new rung on the ladder.
That's right. Yeah. Do you have...
I think that's going to continue.
Do you have a link to that study on your website?
We pulled it down because it's dated. We're doing an update, so I don't know if they finished that yet. But it was basically someone starting at 21, and if they're contributing their 401k at the max rate, which is what we highly recommend.
Yep.
That because of that earlier seniority, they're going to progress quicker and get those upgrades quicker, and that can really add up over a 40-year, 42-year career.
Sure. Yeah. It'll be interesting. I would love to get that out to my listeners when you get that updated. So let's stay in touch, and I'll get that sent out to everybody. Maybe mention it on one of the future episodes, because that's really good information. All right. So what is your, and again, you've touched on some of this already, but what would be your advice for a potential student pilot to help work through their success?
Stick with it is the main thing. There will be plateaus on every rating. There's going to be hurdles. You're not going to think you can make it. But if you have a positive attitude and you just plow through it and keep bouncing those landings, you'll eventually get them when they're smooth. It really is a numbers game. So we see way too many people give up that just convinced they'll never master a landing. And, in some cases, their instructor will think, well, another month they would have been nailing every one of them. But they got to fly that month.
Stick with it. That's the advice.
Yeah.
All right.
It's not easy. If it were easy, there wouldn't be a pilot shortage.
That's right.
But it's worth it.
Cool. All right. Anything that I didn't ask that I should have, Stu?
I can't think of anything. Well, I will say one thing. We mentioned earlier that the 4-year degree is no longer required for the airlines.
Right.
I still think people ought to get a degree.
Backup plans, right?
Airline or corporate. Corporate still requires it more than airlines do. But we recommend that you get those ratings as quickly as possible, build your hours as quickly as possible. And while you're flying, particularly as a first officer on reserve, work online and get a degree. Yeah. Even if it's just a two-year degree. Right. That means a lot, particularly in the corporate world.
Excellent. Good advice. All right. I just got one more question for you. Any chance in the near future of getting a Pilot's Journey episode update?
We poked at it a few times over the last year or so. And right now, both Stu and Mike are flying 121, and so crazy because again, I
thought Mike
busy.
Was 120 was 135.
Actually, he may be 135. You're right.
Yeah,
that's definitely
that's what I told you this before, but that's what makes that podcast so interesting to me is you're running a flight school and you're a CFI. One of them is flying 121, another one's flying 135. Those stories are gold, man. I know that I'm not alone when I say we would love to hear more.
That had anything commercially oriented at all. I know. And that was just because he was instructing for the fun of it.
I know.
So it really is interesting that we've all ended up as a career in it. So
I know. I love it. So hopefully I'm crossing my fingers. Well, Stu,
I'll see if I can nail them down. We were going to try to do Oshkosh this year, but ended up none of us are going to be able to make it this year. But,
yeah, that's a disappointment.
We've all got it on the calendar for next year. We're going to determine to make it in 23.
All right. Awesome. Well, Stu, I really appreciate the time. This was super interesting. Really great to kind of get the insights from you on the inside of an ab initio flight school. I'm sure it's going to be really interesting to a lot of the listeners. So thank you very much.
Well, I've enjoyed it. It's nice catching up with you, and hopefully we get to talk to some more over the next few months, years, rest of our careers.
Of course. I would love it. All right. Well, thanks. Have a great one.
You too. Take care.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed our chat. Please let me know if you have any questions for Stu, and I'll pass them along. Also, I'll likely have similar discussions with others in the industry, especially around training. So let me know what you'd like me to ask in future episodes. You can do that via email or the contact form on the website. My email address is bill@studentpilotcast.com, or you can reach me on the website contact form at studentpilotcast.com. On Twitter, I'm @BillWill. That's Bravo India Lima Lima Whiskey India Lima. I love talking to people who have similar passion for aviation, and especially when they dive into it as Stu has done. As he mentioned, when he started the Pilot's Journey podcast, he was a private pilot and flying for fun, along with one of his other co-hosts. Now, all three of them are doing something different professionally in aviation. Quite a pilot's journey after all. If any of you are thinking about a career in the cockpit, it seems like a great time to become a pilot. Feel free to reach out to Thrust Flight or any other flight school and get started. Thanks for listening.
No, I
Music for today's episode is To Be an Angel by the Canadian band Uncle Seth. You can get more information and subscribe to the podcast feeds on the web at studentpilotcast.com. Remember, any instruction that you hear in this podcast was meant for me and for me alone in the situation I was in at the time. Please do not try to blindly apply anything you see or hear in this podcast to your own flying without thinking it through on your own completely. If you have questions about any aspect of your flying, please consult a qualified CFI.